In this video, I share 3 tips for making the most of a master study while I draw this Harzac piece in pen and ink by French comic artist Jean Giraud, better known as Moebius. To accelerate your learning doing master studies, start with the end in mind. You need an objective. What skills or knowledge will you gain? How will doing a master study help you reach your goals? If you're in the habit of self-assessing your art, you already have a solid idea of the areas you want to progress on. You're also likely aware that to make improvements, it all ties back to practicing the key fundamentals. For example, my objective with this Moebius study is to improve how I communicate light and shadow with lines. If you have a tendency to feel overwhelmed by great art, having a specific objective will help you navigate through those negative thoughts and keep your focus on the learning task. Understand what you're doing. Tracing the master's work will help with imitating their line technique. Copying will help with better understanding how the master made decisions. It gives you information on how they execute the fundamentals. Some would argue that these methods have no value as a learning aid, and I'd agree that tracing and copying have their limitations for teaching you how to draw, unless you pair these methods with a learning objective, meaning that it's important to understand what you're doing. Just tracing or copying on its own without conscientiousness is less effective. It's important to understand why the master made the decisions that they did, because in the end, we want to be able to apply those learnings into our own work. Accelerate your learning by using a structured framework. You need a plan. I have 2 approaches for master studies. The first, as mentioned, is to assess your own work and determine which of the key fundamentals you most need to work on. Then, you search for a master who's proficient in those areas. For example, if I wanted to improve my gesture drawings, I might look to a Karl Kopinski. Or if I wanted to practice dynamic compositions, I'd look to Katsuya Terada. If that approach sounds good to you and you want to know more, check out these videos here. The second approach, if you're unsure about what you most need to work on, you can find your goals by reversing that process. Start by choosing a master whose work you find inspiring. Moebius is renowned for creating imaginative worlds. What's inspiring to me is his proficiency with line technique, most notably how he communicates light and shadow with clean lines. Okay, so we know what he's good at, and from here, I use a framework to further analyze his work. It's a series of questions that can give us clues as to why the master made decisions. These answers will help us focus our study on a specific learning task. I ask the questions, then tie those to a key fundamental so that I have something concrete to practice. From what direction are the sources of light? I'm looking for cast shadows, so those are the darkest values, any reflections, the lightest values, highlights, which are whites, and the midtones, which are grays. And that ties back to the fundamental of gradation of values to create volume. What stroke techniques were used for building values? Hatches, cross hatches, any textures, and are there changes in the angle of line direction? And this relates back to shape and form, lines that follow the form or cross the form. Where's the horizon line? From what perspective is the viewer looking at the subject? How is the main subject framed in the composition? And this relates back to perspective, space, composition, and visual storytelling. By going through that structured analysis, you can see how goals would start to emerge. For example, when I used that framework to analyze this Harzac piece, 3 things jumped out for me. First, the source of light. There's essentially 2 sources of light. The direct light hitting this moon planet thing, which bounces, creating a top reflection. I typically draw with a single source of light, so a potential goal for me is to introduce more complex lighting into my art. Second, looking for the horizon line, I noticed the effects of perspective, space, and geometry. He didn't use excessive foreshortening to emphasize the viewpoint, yet you very much still feel like part of the story when looking at this image as though you're standing there with this character flying above you. I typically draw scenes straight on, without perspective, so I have room to grow there. The third, his stroke technique is the most striking to me. Notice how effectively he communicates communicates form. Without the use of high contrast, there's no solid blacks, no cross-hatching or excessive textures. He uses line weight and line flow to communicate form. I tend to rework my pieces. I add the contrast after to emphasize the form, and I would benefit from being more deliberate with my first set of lines. In an interview, Moebius said that he spends a lot of time on his pencils before inking so that he can focus on the artistry when applying the ink rather than on decision making. By going through this reverse approach, valuable objectives emerged. As you can see, there's a lot to learn from studying the masters beyond tracing and copying. Start with the end in mind. Conscientiously seek to understand why the master made the decisions that they did. You can choose a master that suits your goals or analyze a master to reveal your goals. If you don't have a coach or mentor to guide you, these self-directed methods of study will help you make the best of your time and accelerate your learning. In the description are links to videos on Jean-Giraud Moebius if you'd like to learn more about him, as well as a free PDF of the study questions from this video. If you're new here, I'd appreciate you taking a second to like and subscribe, as this helps other pen and ink fans find my content. I'd love to hear your suggestions for other masters to feature in the future. Thanks again, and I'll see you in the next one.